Hi, and welcome to today's panel on early investments in STEM learning to strengthen local economies, hosted in partnership between SciFest Africa and Tata Consultancy Services. I'm John DeChara. I'm the global manager for goIT, Tata Consultancy Services' flagship digital innovation and career readiness program. Now, with over a decade of success and a footprint of 38 countries, goIT has now directly impacted more than 100,000 students around the globe, and students have designed 26,000 plus tech for good digital innovation prototypes. Now, programs like goIT prepare students with the skills and confidence to pursue careers of the future and close local skills gaps. Over the next year, TCS is embarking on a global tour across 8 countries to hear local needs, share best practices, and hear success stories around closing the STEM skills gap, diversifying our local STEM talent pipelines, and empowering our youth to think globally as digital innovators. Today is the kickoff of this global tour, and we are thrilled to be starting in South Africa with SciFest Africa alongside our esteemed panelists. To get us started and help us glean insights from our expert panelists, I'll hand it over to today's moderator, Rochelle Blau, the Skills Development, Diversity and Localization Lead for TCS South Africa. Over to you, Rochelle.
Thank you so much, John. What a way to start a conversation. And I heard you saying it's the start of 8 countries. And from South Africa, I must say that we are honored to start off this conversation that is so important, not only in South Africa, but for the entire Sub-Saharan Africa and the world at large. To introduce our panel for today in discussion with me, we have Dr. Beverly Damonse. She's the Group Executive of NRF Science Engagement and Corporate Engagements with us today. Welcome, Dr. Beverly.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you very much for that introduction.
Thank you. We have Professor Alfredo Terzoli from Rhodes University, and Prof is heading the Telecom Center of Excellence. Welcome,
Hi,
Prof.
everybody. Yes, hi, everybody, and thanks for having me here.
With us also, we have Karen Dudley, the Director for Curriculum Development at the Western Cape Department of Education. Welcome, Karen.
Good evening, everybody, and what a privilege and an honor it is to join this esteemed panel to partake in a very lively debate today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen. Welcome. And then we have representation from industry as well. Mr. Langa Dube, the Executive Director for Tata South Africa Consultancy Services, South Africa. Welcome, Langa.
Thank you, Rochelle. Good evening, everybody. And thank you for the opportunity to participate in this engagement today. Looking forward to the discussions and with my fellow esteemed panel.
Thank you so much, Langa. So we actually have a panel that compromises of everybody that is required in this conversation. And that for me is extremely important. But just to think about the conversation today, the conversation is around the role of early investment in STEM learning amongst our youth to also help and assist strengthening economies. And economies in today's conversation is South Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. But here's the problem statement that we are dealing with today. The jobs of tomorrow, or maybe we should say the jobs of today already, because we have seen a lot of changes in the way of working, the way of communication, and the way we live our lives in the past nearly 2 years already. Now, with employers in countries around the world, now we are dealing with the disparity between what is it that industry needs to operate, to build economies, and what is it that our youth or our young people possess in terms of education and skill. So we're sitting with this dynamic that is contradicting each other. Business wants this, education is giving us that, the skill that we require to build economies is just nowhere to be found. Now, taking this into consideration, I would like to now turn to our panel to help us now unearth the current situation of STEM in Sub-Saharan Africa. Right. So, Prof. Alfred, if you can just help us here, Prof. Alfredo, with this one. So, what are the challenges that are affecting early investment in STEM? But if you think about the challenges in early investment in STEM, I want you also to think about, tell us, what is early? If we talk about STEM, what is early?
Okay, thank you very much. The early, for me, actually would mean preschool or earlier. The sooner the better, of course. The point is, any early investment is a problem from what is actually the prime actor, or should be the prime actor in this space, which is government. Not just this government, not just South Africa, but generally, because the early investment is seen as risky. You have a lot of people, quite a few won't come out at the other side in the pipeline, etc. And that makes for politicians to make decisions that are investing particularly towards the end of the cycle. In fact, in universities, and of course, university students are more vocal as well than preschoolers, obviously. So the core point is that, until this thing does not change, it's going to become quite a uphill situation. Because in practice, in all the school curriculum, for the vast majority of the youth in South Africa, there is no exposure to technology, and there is very little scientific thinking that goes on.
Okay, Prof, you said something very profound, and what I've picked up there is late investment. Now, let me give you a scenario. You have a Rochelle that goes to school, and then when she reaches first year in high school, in my time it was standard 6, she developed this fear for mathematics. What do you think? And this is where she just dropped it, immediately dumped it, and went into an economics faculty. Now, given that scenario, Prof, and thinking about late investment at the same time, why do you think that students are not choosing STEM careers or STEM subjects or STEM career paths?
Yeah, well, first of all, Rochelle, if mathematics has turned you off, probably the next idea is not to go into economics or something, maybe home economy, make bread or something. But I hear what you're saying. This is the actual drama in many senses. The mathematics is actually something that we've seen, unfortunately, quite a bit in South Africa, as something that, you have the gift or you don't have the gift. I'm totally, this idea lacks completely any experimental base on that completely, but still is the stuff that in most cases by the teachers, by the government planners, etc., is the truth that is kind of for some reason seen as the real thing. So and that is one thing that has to be cured, even before putting technology down. That is something that has to be cleared. One thing that I wanted to add, we do have, you were talking about scenarios. We do have something that is called the National Development Plan, NDP, that started quite a few years ago, whose really impact on society is still to be seen. Actually, nothing much has happened. But one of the things in the plan, and I remember being at the conference with Trevor Manuel, illustrating that with a cartoon that was built The name was not Rochelle, okay, that was another name, was a young girl. And the focus was Rochelle in a rural area, which is still highly populated here. And by the way, is the section about with the highest fertility in South Africa. There are certainly the highest concentration of young people there. Townships, as they call this here, the kind of, in South Africa, township is the area that used to be just for Black people, okay? Anyway, it was exactly this cartoon where there was this young girl that was finally empowered to go to a school that was going to be able to, bring her up to what would have been a normal career for the kind of world that we see at the moment. Right, beyond the cartoon, unfortunately, nothing has happened. But in theory, there is a national development plan that South Africa is supposed to be implementing. And of course, COVID has not helped and all that. But even before COVID, the stuff was really, really lagging behind.
Prof, I cannot agree with you more. Let's bring in Karen quickly in this conversation. Karen, Prof has mentioned the National Development Plan, and we know from white paper to green paper how things normally shift. Please help us just take Prof's conversation further. Now, given that, we want to know, are there policies in place that will now ensure early investment in STEM? Also, the example that I've made to Prof, to ensure learning amongst young people, and what would then the alignment between policy and practice be? Because remember, Prof said, National Development Plan was there. We are how many years later, we cannot see the results of it. So maybe there's policy that hinders it. Maybe that's policy that is still coming. Help us think around this.
Thank you so much once again, Rochelle. And yes, as you alluded to the fact, that Prof spoke about the NDP, the National Development Plan, which has a date for 2030. However, quite a number of things have happened, and perhaps in the public forum, and especially in the last 2 years, that may not have been so prevalent. And so while I find myself representing the Western Cape Education Department, who's not an entity on its own, however, but is aligned to the national, or the National Department of Basic Education, I think in the Western Cape, we've made some groundbreaking things in terms of policy. So while movement appears to the public to be very slow because you have a country with 9 provinces, huge inequalities. And so when I talk now, I'd like to make reference to the Western Cape, but yet, however, connected to policy. And so we looked at the 8 World Millennium Goals. And one of those Millennium Goals is to promote gender equality and to empower women. And so when looking at that as the Western Cape government and the Western Cape Education Department, we have developed a strategy in alignment to the NDP goals, looking at those 8 millennium goals. And we've developed a strategy, and what I love, when there's a strategy, Rochelle, funding comes with that, advocacy comes with that, opportunities comes with that. And so especially for the girl child, for the young woman. And so we know, if I'm looking at, so we've developed this strategic policy called STREAMAC. STREAMAC, and of course the S being for science, T technology, the R is debatable, reading or robotics. We've got the E for engineering, A agriculture, M mathematics, A is for autonautical, and then C for coding and robotics. And you'll notice some of those things that I've said there, especially the robotics, especially the coding part. And those are some of the policies that are already aligning to ensure that we develop the correct future citizens who can be able to align with critical thinking and reasoning. And I think for us, we've also introduced, to align that policy with STREAMAC and that strategy, a number of partnerships. I think as education, one has to realize you cannot do it alone. You work in a bureaucracy and there are certain boundaries in with the bureaucracy. And I think for me, the secret and the success in the Western Cape has been collaboration, partnership, and giving that advocacy and partnerships with people such as Sakikamfa, if you're looking at the Cape Town Science Center, Reach Robots, and these are all companies that we are investing in our schools, in our rural schools, because the Western Cape has 4 urban communities and 4 rural districts. And we're saying, so how do we, for our rural districts, we also have these opportunities where we are building drone labs, we are building, nautical embassies, etc. We're looking at space labs together with Sakikamfa. As I said, we also in partnership with various HEIs, Stellenbosch University, the university, Nelson Mandela University, was we saying, and in each of these programs and partnerships, part of this stream max strategy that I talk about, this policy that we have, and that we're influencing, is that at the end of the day, all of these partners have stipulated in there, and we have signed contracts with them in agreement that 50% of them have to be to empower the girl child. And if you can produce that, and that is, and when I say, 50%, that means having a mentor, ensuring that if you receive resources, and so at any given time, a monitoring and evaluation is done unannounced at your particular school to be able to see, is this a true register of learners? Those learners are tracked by a coaching and a mentoring as well, because we know the whole aim for us is to be developing, as I said, those new citizens to be able to have a STEM literacy background, because that is going to change the economy. And so, yes, while NDP seems like something very big that was decided long ago, the steps, I must admit, have been very marginal. But over the past 2 to 3 years, with the curriculum and assessment policy statements, with coding and robotics coming in, and this is the exciting part. You said, how early do we start? And we are starting in foundation phase. And so when I see that little girl taking a robot and being able to code it and direct it, it shows against that self-confidence for those little ones, that there is no gender attached to a particular career, but it's open for all. But the one thing that really warms my heart is in the strategy, underpinned, signed by, our Western Cape Education Government, 50% for all women and girls. And I think that for me is the game changer, to being able to achieve those NDP goals and really truly living, one of the 8 millennium goals, as mentioned already, empowering women and children. And I think that for me is a game changer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Karen. There are 2 things that you've mentioned in your response, but I'm going to come back to them later. So gear yourself up for that, because I'm curious what you're going to respond on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just to move on into a next phase of our conversation, which is innovative solutions to create youth participation in the STEM education. Now, Langa, we heard that Karen is talking about funding and partnerships, right? And we also believe that government cannot do this alone. As a country, we need to hold hands. Sub-Saharan Africa, we need to really do something about that as business. Now, Langa, can you help us here? Karen is talking about funding. She's talking about partnerships. Now, we have seen there are other organizations as well that are involved in initiatives to support STEM education. So what role do you think as business, as industry, you can play, or more such players can then be involved in to accelerate in the acceleration of new technology, the development of skills, and the employment into the STEM, what we say, roles or jobs? What role can you play as industry?
Thanks, Rochelle. And I think maybe I will answer in a very different way, right? Because I want to maybe take one step back and say that the people we are discussing about are the people who are the generation Z as well as the generation Alpha. If I took an Alpha from 2010 onwards, Z from around about the year 2000. Very uniquely about these people, there are pretty much 2007. My son is a 2007. You know what happened in 2007? The iPhone came, And so came the increase in terms of digitization and digitalization right across the world. So if you look at this, you would realize that a lot of this generation that we're talking about, which needs to take STEM now, is a generation that is a generation of consumers of the pervasive digitization that has taken place in our societies as we enter into Industrial Revolution 4 to Revolution 5. So they are more consumers. They are the consumers of the apps. They are the consumers of the XR, the drones, the AI platforms. They are the consumers of all the platforms out there. You don't tell them where to go in terms of TikTok. They know. Okay. On average, my son is on 3 gadgets at the same time. He's in front of the TV. He has also got his iPhone, plus also he's working on the tablet at the same time, because that is how integrated this generation is. Now, how do we help them? And I think we cannot discuss that without talking about the fact that we are in a business at the end of the day. The reason why we are in business is because we have to make profits. So it's a function of supply and demand. Okay, so whether it's agriculture, whether it is life sciences, whether it is food, it is products, it is services, it's all going to be about products and services. How do we get our products and services to the market out there? So there is a demand in the market. However, the pipeline or the channel that brings the resources or the people or the skills or the capabilities that are driving the fulfillment of those requirements, the 17 years on average that our children are spending at school, there's a gap, right? There's still a gap. A lot has been done, but there's still a gap in terms of 17 years from primary school education, adding another 5 years of university, landing onto the marketplace. You find that you've got about 4 or 5 years still to add for the person to perform very basic analytics work. Okay, so that is on the one side. What the customers require versus what is getting produced by our education system. And I'm glad that a lot is being done across provinces, but a lot more can be done. So that's one. I mean, supply and demand is a very key issue. Secondly, the customers, including this very same ones we're talking about who are STEM, their requirements have changed, right? The requirements of the customers who are including the grade 1s to grade 7s, the grade 7s to grade 12s, are the same consumers, and their requirements have changed so significantly that they don't use basic manual activities anymore. They very much use digital tools across. I think this is much more across the very divides that we have in our country. So that is the second point I wanted to make. The third point is that the needs of the customers are changing very significantly, right? Because of this change, production is disrupted. We don't have typewriters anymore. We don't have, we don't have email. We don't have messengers, post office. You hardly use it anymore because information has become a lot more instant. What does that mean? It means that everyone, including the people we're talking about, are data-driven in terms of their activities. So which means, is there a way that we can include over and above the fact that data science is about maths and statistics, is about computer science, is about business acumen? Is there a way that we can include in the curriculum of training the ability for the people to be able, for our children, to be able to think about the business aspects of the technology they are playing with? You know, they're playing with robots, they are playing with artificial intelligence, they're playing with XR. They are doing this on a daily basis, right, in their gadgets. But can we make them new Tencents, new Alibabas? Can we make them new Facebooks? Can we produce new Facebooks within that? I think we can. But we need to change elements whilst we're doing very well in terms of the specific trainings. But the view that we see from an industry perspective is they are not completely ready. The opportunities are there. The market has changed. The fourth industrial revolution, we are into fifth, which is cyber physical, which requires that at the end of the career of a child who is in grade 1 today, they will definitely need data science as part of their core to be able to function in the job. Today, there's a gap. We need to try and fit in those kind of gaps.
Okay. Thank you so much, Langa. And I think we need a conversation, Karen. We need a conversation between yourselves and industry, and so we need to see how can we build the skills and what would then be the contribution from business to help you to get the National Development Plan into full function and implementation phase. Now, Langa is talking about 3 different types of gadgets that his boy sits with at any given time. And that makes me think, Dr. Beverly, help us think here through this question quickly. Given the scenario that Langa just given us, what is the role of science communication and engagement in ensuring that our societies are informed and inspired to be involved in STEM? And do you think that, do you say that South Africa is well placed in terms of creating a science literacy society where learners are channeled towards STEM and future skills from a young age? Are we getting there as a country? What do you think?
Thank you, Rochelle. I guess the really maybe let me go back just as Langa started, because I actually wanted to start with his last question about maybe we teach the business aspects of the technologies. We're thinking, where do you get society to even understand the science aspects of that? So yeah. So it's just so interesting. So let me just go a little bit back. And maybe it will help me to answer the question. So the Academy of Science of South Africa put out a new newsletter earlier this week. And an interesting article it had in there spoke about the equity project prospects for South African science in the wake of the pandemic. And it put a really clear, little graphic. And I think it will help us to understand the situation. It just says to us, and this was out of research at the University of Stellenbosch, it says, in terms of thinking about our pipeline, because you asked everybody, how early do you start? And I'm thinking you're asking me, how early do you start to communicate, and that kind of thing. And so it says, if we think about 100 children who start school, nice, easy number. If we think of 100 children who start school, actually 60 will matriculate, right? Of that 60, 60 will write matric, and of the 60 who write the exam, 37 will pass. Of the 37 who will pass, 14 will pass with a bachelor's pass, meaning they can go to university. Of those 14, 12 will go to university. And of those 12 who go to university, 4 will gain a degree inside of 6 years. So of the 100 who start, 4 will gain a degree inside of 6 years. I think, first of all, that we have to recognize is a very weak pipeline, highly inefficient, and also seriously unequal in terms of issues like race and class and gender and other factors that affect us. So I suspect when we have these conversations, we located in that reality. That'll be great for them to have, access to technologies and great for all these partnerships. The reality on the ground, I think, must ground us. And so when we as South Africa, we have a very strong science, technology, and innovation policy that says to us that actually, as a country, we are going to make science, technology, and innovation contribute to the success of this nation. It's going to be at the core of our success. And I wonder, if you went on a little poll right now and you ask what makes us successful, we for a long time have been really celebrating the success of our rugby team, the success of our soccer teams, the success of just about anything, But I wonder how many people would know that as a nation, we have a very small science system, but we have some really outstanding globally productive research fields, science fields in the country. And the question is, it's not just in terms of communication about those scientists, but we want to say, to what extent do we as a nation see that science, technology, and innovation is a major contribution to our global status? And do we have conversations about that? Is the conversation in the home about science, technology, and innovation? Because that's where it has to start, regardless of where along the chain. So I just want to say, in the pandemic, for example, right now, has been one of the key times that where we have seen that the national conversation, whether you look on social media, whether you look in print traditional media itself, whether you put on the TV at or whether you're sitting around a braai in your social circles, that science in the terms of the virus, in the terms of vaccination, in the terms of infection rates, in the terms of hospitalizations and causes of death, all of these are located. Conversations have for the first time been driven by a very strong science conversation. And there we see, and remember that driven by science doesn't mean everybody agrees, right? We had a really critical engagement around the issue of vaccination, for example, from all walks of life. And we find that the building of a critical science capacity, a critical conversation of science has really only happened because of the exposure. For the first time, we have had science elevated to the political level, right? The president and the scientists, they are profiled. We're really seeing the highest level of the science. And we're going to say, well, that's what we've seen as a country. What kind of interventions, what kind of communication must we have on a consistent basis? Because if we have once-off campaigns, once-off ideal popularization efforts, they come and go. But we really need a consistent message. We need to see the scientists. We need to see ourselves. We need to see the scientists from our communities. We need to meet the nuclear scientists. We need to meet the astronomer and understand that they are the people, and we can all be, part of that community, given, only given the kinds of investments that we are thinking about. So really what we want to do is to have a science community, and we do. The Department of Science and Innovation has a science strategy for science engagement, where really there is a policy effort to produce a critical mass of science communicators to help to build an engaged society through the research and the researchers that we have. And there's every effort to profile South African science. I think we are at an early stage, and there's still much to be done because it has to be holistic. It really can't be just about the message. It has to be where it lands, who takes it up, how we give expression to it, and then support it, I said, in a larger system, either an education system, a family system, the community system, and then the education system itself. So I think, the panel may be neat in the sense that we all come from different viewpoints, but I think unless we work together, fixing that highly unequal and inefficient pipeline is not only education's job alone. It is, it is the communication job. It's the examples. It's the programs that we run that must work holistically within the context of the community that we serve.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Dr. Beverly. And they say one step at a time, but at times certain things takes very long. And by the time we've reached our 10 steps, we actually need to go back to step number 4 because something has just changed.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
I also just think, from a communication point of view, and in terms of raising awareness, in terms of motivation, in terms of, looking at these examples, the impact is never really immediate, changing attitudes towards science, because there is an assumption that there's a positive relationship between the public and science and technology. And if you have this positive relation, then you're going to support economic, personal, and social development. But the making that connection, as a one-to-one, really doesn't work. Sometimes having a conversation with a young person in school, really, in terms of science, can only find expression much later, maybe when they're choosing to do math and science. So
absolutely,
we've got to take all of these things into consideration, but communication is key.
Is key.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think, and communication, Dr. Bev, not even only in our professional lives, communication stretch right through our living. And if we can get it right by teaching a child how to say, "Mommy," I'm sure somehow there are some systems we can put in place in helping these youngsters and steering them into a conversation where they understand this is not something that you do only for now, but is building on the future. Thank you so much, Dr. Bev.
thank you.
What Dr. Beverly said now just made me go back, unfortunately, to quickly to Professor Alfredo. Prof. Doc mentioned a couple of things around it's not a one-sided thing that needs to happen. Communication needs to come in here. Do you think that South Africa as a country, or Sub-Saharan Africa, we are well placed in terms of creating a science literacy where learners are channeled towards STEM education so that we can create these youngsters and the skills that we need in business?
Yeah, I think we are in a reasonable position altogether within the African context. The problem is I have experienced directly is the fact that at the end of the day, unfortunately, the government component of this partnership that should include, of course, the private sector, should include the academia, should include, of course, the communities, as Beverly was saying just now. In these partnerships, the weak point is the commitment of the government to really scale up and be the element that brings the stuff together and make it happen on the ground. Now, I don't know why that is so, but is the major problem. If that was not the case, I would guess that we would not have had the very negative impact on, for example, the education experience of the majority of the youth due to COVID, because we would have had already technology disseminated through society, including the most important in terms of numbers part of the country, that means rural areas, deep rural areas and townships. Just to go back quickly to what Langa Dube was saying, well, in my experience and the experience of my colleagues of the group that I represent, that what he was saying applies to, at the best, about 25% of the youth in South Africa. So this integration, forget about the integration, etc., but simply access to those type of technologies is not actually available with this ease to at least 70 to 75% of our youth, which of course is a big problem in itself. But otherwise, the answer to you, yes, it is, in my opinion, totally possible, but we need a government that is really happy to collaborate with the various other parts of society and solve them. Yeah,
absolutely. And I agree with you, Dr. Alfredo, Professor Alfredo, because when COVID started early last year, that aspect was exposed, because now children had to learn at home and they need to get their assignments digitally, their homework digitally, and we were exposed from that angle where only a minimum of 25% of children has got access to that. I agree with you 100%. And Dr. Beverly has has raised a lot of concerning factors. And one of them that also is coming to my mind now is how quickly and how early this development can happen, which now takes me back to Karen quickly. Karen, help us here with how has the scene of curriculum development changed over the past few years? We know that we were challenged from last year, firstly, and then secondly, if you look only at STEM careers, for instance, technology plays a big role in it. Technology changes. When you're in the IT industry, you wake up tomorrow morning and something has changed. How do we do this? Do you think that the scene of curriculum development has changed? Are we there, or are there still a lot of things that needs to be done for us to keep up with the industry?
Thank you so much, Rochelle. Look, I'll be the first to admit, and I think one mustn't be naive or try to defend, because then you've already lost the collaboration. And yes, there is still, if I look at the whole of South Africa, and as Prof made reference to, when you go into our very deep rural communities, you know, where you don't even get a cell phone or a mobile signal, you know, and being thrown into the pandemic as well. We found lots of, because while we want to take our learners to self-directed learning and our younger ones to self-directed learning at the same time, we found that policy wasn't supportive of that. And so at the moment, there's a big curriculum review. Just before this webinar, I was in another national meeting where we're busy looking at a curriculum review in terms of the content, in terms of accessibility, in terms of the amount of subjects, and where is it taking our children in terms of STEM careers. You know, so yes, a few changes have been made, but once again, I must admit, Rochelle, it has been very, very slow. And therefore, in the Western Cape, we've really gone with those partnerships, as I've mentioned before. And it's not just a partnership, but it is where it's an investment, especially, you know, while we talk STEM subjects, let's not forget about our computer science, let's not forget about our agriculture subjects.
Yes.
And I think we moved from that, where we're now looking at, before we moved and we had math and science schools, and those were called dinner lady schools. We've now moved to agriculture schools. We're now moving to schools who focus, you know, on coding, as I said, and on robotics. We also have something, when I'm talking policy change and we're talking business, one of the most positive changes for me have been in terms of policy. And while we're piloting, but this is something as well, is called the E-Cubed program. And so while that one is still in a white paper stage, and you're talking about the white paper to the green, you know, so E-Cube stands for entrepreneurship, employability, and education. And that is where we're preparing our learners, especially from grade 7 to grade 9 and further into FET, to have that career in STEM subjects, to be able to offer that connectivity, each one of them receiving a device, each one receiving a data card. Of course, we have a number of policies we have to put in place. One cannot, you know, when it comes to insurance of all of those, but that is, and then when you take the pedagogy, let's not forget the pedagogy that goes with this. I think for me, that's because, and that's the curriculum review I'm talking about. And the curriculum review and conversation is, should we move in a direction of project-based learning? While we took content overload, and now I make reference especially to the lower grades, to primary school, because in the past we've had a huge focus on mathematics and reading. And while that's important, as I spoke about the STEM literacy, so yes, coming back to the actual question in terms of policy, still in any bureaucracy, when you've got, you know, if I just think here in the Western Cape, we've got just in foundation phase, 11,000 teachers. So we've got certain strategic goals. We also have certain drivers, and some of those drivers being teacher professional development. We're looking at partnerships, and the third one being internal collaboration. And why do I say internal collaboration? Because where curriculum's policy might be a hindrance, and I say that within inverted commas, you could have another department, for example, Department of Social Development, who could come in, who does not have such a stringent policy, because it takes a very long time to turn policy.
Yes, absolutely.
Internal collaboration. It's about teacher training, teacher development, you know, and even connecting with our higher education institutes. We meet with the deans of the universities once per month to be able to look at that trajectory from grade 10 to grade 12 and put our learners in particular programs. So the E-Cubed one is a great one. It's now in its third year, you know, Rochelle, and that one is really going to bring about that 21st century skills in our learners, connecting business, connecting technologies, but applying the correct pedagogy with those policies in place.
I'm just thinking on my feet now with regards to the link that has been made between business and education, which is something that should have been there a long time ago. And I really appreciate that it's coming through now. The question that I now have on that one is it already evident in our schools that the curriculums is coming with, the children understand, and it drives them into the skill or the requirement that business has? Is that part of the curriculum change already visible?
Not as visible as we'd like it to be, and therefore the collaboration, I think, and part of that, we have a huge media campaign, you know, and so when we have, for example, the Western Cape Education Department has their bank account with Nedbank, which is a huge investment. And so when you're making an investment like that, I think one can be a little demanding in terms of saying, well, what are the profit margins in terms of education, in terms of the girl child once again? So it's not where we'd like it to be, but I think more and more it's surfacing, you know, the more we have our advocacy campaigns, the more and especially now that we have our Stream Max strategy, where with each and every one of those letters, you know, science, technology, engineering, we've associated to more than one company, where we've profiled learners, where we've identified them. We've gone with mobile units, we've gone with roadshows. We just did a wonderful roadshow now with Saki Kamfa, you know, on various laboratories, starting at primary school. I'm thinking of a school such as Silverleaf Primary in Athlone area. Then you're looking at a rural primary school such as Panorama Primary, where we're going to have drone labs. That in that way, it's already making itself evident. You know, because as I say, I think the wheels of government can sometimes have lots of bureaucracy. We understand why, and therefore we need to be able to see how can we assist policy to be able to make it practical within the classroom.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karen. It really gives us hope as a nation, so that we can look forward in where's our children going and what would they become in South Africa and in Sub-Saharan Africa, looking at the requirements that STEM has got. Thank you so much, Karen. I just want to go back to Dr. Beverly quickly. Dr. Beverly, you've raised a couple of things that gives me the shivers. Now, tell me, do you think that digital education presents opportunities to change the picture that you've drawn for us? Because it's really scary, the numbers. And also you see that 13% of graduates, only 30% of people are graduating. You'll see the numbers that only 51% of young adults get upper to higher education. So now, do you think digital education will help?
I'm sure it does, and I'm sure it can. But you can't just, I think, take digital as meaning let's apply everybody with computers, or every student gets a computer, and you should be successful from that point inwards. As in the other areas, I think we've got to look at these things holistically. If some of the research shows that you remember when the lockdown started in March 2020, we found that some schools and some children in some schools made the transition from face-to-face teaching to online learning very, very smoothly. Yes. Whereas for a large number of other, this didn't happen. And we have almost what is now called a lost generation in terms of this transition being unsuccessful. And what we found is the transition happened much earlier when once schools already had an advanced stage of technologies in them, but secondly, the ease of connection from the home, right? So you had two different situations arising. You needed to move very seamlessly from the school provision into the home provision, into the home environment. And where that transition doesn't happen, you know that it would not result in the kind of change that you are thinking about. But yes, the technology in itself, I think what universities have done over time, it's also shown in this case that they can move to that transition. But we'd have to think much more clearly about what that means, you know, in terms of how we teach, in terms of the extent to which we use that technology as a place for exploration, as a place for driving curiosity, as opposed to a place where you do multiple choice questions, you know, click the button, where we go. So we are finding that technology and digital technology can make a difference, but it also still depends on how it's used, to what extent it is still used creatively, to what extent it will drive new ways of learning. You know, if it drives the same old rote learning, go online, see your textbook, read your textbook, fill in an assessment form. No, you've just moved from the physical into the digital without changing the outcomes, I think. But it does allow us, in innovative situations, I think the technology can allow us to think through new ways of teaching, new ways of learning, new ways of connecting remote communities, new ways of connecting, you know, local and global communities, so that the experience starts to be much more shared, so that we start getting different perspectives, having very, you know, cross-community conversations using the digital media. So I think it has a lot of advantages, but I think there's also, unless we're clear and careful about it, it can be more of the same. If we just transfer the same, you know, ethos from the physical environment into the online environment, and that would be a loss. I think there is, you know, in what people are doing now, teaching coding, teaching robotics, you know, there's all of these, but are like Alanga said, are children understanding what that means outside of the play aspect of it right now? Are they thinking through, what does this mean from a science perspective? What does it mean from a technology perspective? And how will they use that to create the new kind of businesses of the future? You know, I think maybe that's where we're trying to look, as opposed to reproducing more of the same.
Yes, and where our thinking needs to go towards, in terms of what are we going to change to make sure that the outcomes change, and that is what is taking me to the next question. I want to go back to Professor Alfredo, because the questions are streaming in. I want to at least, John, I just want to at least have one question for each panelist before our clock stops. Just quickly, Prof, we've seen the statistics from Dr. Beverly. It's really scary. And just thinking about that statistics, what do you think? The inclusion of women and girls is crucial in the journey towards economic growth and economic empowerment. So how can girls or women be now supported in their STEM learning, or how can we transform opportunities for them to partake in STEM education?
Well, I'm going back to what Karen was saying, and intrinsically in societies as young as South Africa, and we've seen it earlier on in universities as well, but now it's changing. Intrinsically, there is no gender differentiation in this, you know, in the IT field. Although it's forming because it comes from outside. It is an opportunity that is very time limited. It's already closed, it's closing, and it's closed in university. But certainly in places like we are operating, rural areas, and to a certain extent townships, that is still, not determined as it is in other societies and in other spaces. So it's an opportunity, but has to be grabbed in such a way that the figures that Beverly was talking about, which are certainly scaring, can be changed. But let's hope. And by the way, when I was talking about more responsibility and more engagement by the government, I was talking about mostly about national government as opposed to provincial governments.
Yes,
particularly at the level of education, sometimes are doing good things or great things, but there is the rest of the thing, the national system, that is lagging behind. Yeah,
lagging behind. Yes, I agree with you profoundly there from Professor Alfredo. I just want to go back to Langa quickly. Langa, we were running out of time, but if we are talking about specifically how can girls or women be supported in their STEM learning, and how do we bring them into this STEM education, STEM pathway of skills and learning? You know that in business, normally when we have internship programs, the majority of the numbers are boys, and the smallest number is always the girl, or a 0 amongst 10. So what is there that you think can we do to support the girl child into this direction, STEM education and the development of digital skills?
Rochelle, I think there's a lot of initiatives that are being done in terms of making sure that a girl child is taken care of across corporate South Africa. I think we've started this way back. But I think the most important thing is there a culture of inclusion in terms of from a digital perspective, to ensure that continuously we get people who can learn, love technology, who can learn to love digital, who can learn to love numbers, who can learn to be able to understand that there's a business inside technology and we can drive it from there. But the girl-child conversation is a conversation that's fairly important, because still society is not very equal. Still the business world is also still not very equal. But we need a lot more engagement from a business perspective, collectively, in the three parts from a partnership of both business, government, as well as academia. These three have to work together to be able to drive this message home. But for me, the key thing is there is a digital culture that needs to be embraced, that will drive the fact that there is a business inside, and also that women are making a huge impact and a huge contribution towards technology. Various initiatives are being done on this regard, and I think, just from what we are doing with the goIT program, which is about creating girls that can see opportunities through technology. I think that, and if more and more of such initiatives can be done, corporates can do a lot more to achieve this main objective.
Fantastic. Thank you so, Langa. I think we need a bigger conversation here, John. The challenge is on. We need a bigger conversation. We need to bring government together, business, academia, and have this big conversation so that we can find solutions, not only for South Africa, but for Sub-Saharan Africa as a whole. So just in closing quickly, Dr. Beverly, what is it that you would want us to walk away with today? When looking at the different challenges that we've just discussed today around STEM and around the girl child that we need to support, around business, what is it that you can leave us with?
I think that it's complex, that we have to have a holistic approach that involves all partners, that we have to take into account both the school environment, but the home environment, the community environment, that learning is continuing, and that we'd have to completely, I think, in order to provide the new skills, we really have to rethink teaching and learning. to meet new goals.
Yes.
And also rethink our relationship between science and society. We've got to start to have different conversations about the role of science, technology, and innovation.
Absolutely. Make it less intimidating, so that the Rochelles of this world, they die out along the way. Thank you so much, Dr.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Alfredo, just in closing, what would you say should we now walk away with in terms of our conversation today with regards to STEM and science and the way forward?
Well, I think from my point of view, I remain an optimist, and I think there is the possibility of solving the problem, and as well, not just in general for all the youth, but solve the problem of gender imbalance as well. But the window is not going to be open forever. I mean, we started working with these issues since 2005, directly on the ground. We were thinking about the stuff earlier, but on the ground since 2005. And the government was there at the beginning, seems to have, evaporated, okay? And I would really hope that this stuff changes, and we are going to actually being able to launch a kind of a gender neutral push for STEM in our education, changing the way in which we educate, as well as of course Beverly was saying, and I totally agree on that.
Wonderful, wonderful stuff there. Thank you so much, Prof. Alfredo. Just going back lastly to Karen. Karen, we need a collective approach here. We need our education system to really take the ground running and make sure that our children has got it right now before it's too late. What are you saying with regards to STEM education? Where are we going?
First of all, I think we need to, as educators, not to make it so intimidating, not to talk down to our children, and that's where it comes in, because it can be extremely, and so in the primary school factor where all of these STEM subjects are taught in a specific way, and so first of all, the play is important when you're looking at grade 1 to 3, because I'm not pushing a child in a particular. So having play-based education where the child is playing and they don't even realize that I'm heading towards a
learning.
When I get into the intermediate phase, that's grade 4 to 6, we have various competitions such as entrepreneurship within the life skills program. And so it's creating those opportunities. It's about having a multifaceted approach. And that multifaceted approach that we talk about is involving parents, involving business, involving our higher education institutions, and then using digital education as an enabler and not replacing it within education, but how can we enable it? And then last but not least, of course, very proudly to say that 50% of all women should be representative as part of our StreamAct strategy. So to get our women and our girls in there and to give them the opportunity and do not have gender, roles and responsibilities within households and also within various careers. So always raising the girl child, raising the opportunity and the collaboration, teacher development, partnerships, and that is going to bring about change if we go with this multifaceted approach. Thank you so much, Rochelle.
Can't agree with you more. Thank you so much, Karen. Langa, just to end off there, there is a problem. Industry doesn't get the skill that they need. We've discussed not in a lot of detail, but we need more time today around STEM and how we can support our children to go into those lines. What are you saying from business's side? How are we going forward?
Thanks, Rochelle. I think a few things, right? I mean, I said already one is partnership, right? Number one. Number two is really, can we measure the output of what we're investing in, right? In a sense that, if you do STEM education, it's not going to be about how many children did I train on AI. It's going to be about exactly what we are doing on goIT. How many apps that right? How many robots have they?
Langa, your network is a bit challenging. We can't hear what you are saying. So on that note, I think we had a wonderful conversation. All the panelists, it was an amazing conversation. It just needs more time, and I hope that we will be able to get some more time in these conversations. This is one of 8. This is one of 8 conversations we're going to have. South Africa was the first. I think our next conversation is in Mexico, and I would like to encourage our panelists to join in and see what is the difference between this conversation and that one, and the different challenges that we have in Mexico in January. And how we can really come together and collaborate. We have to say thank you so much for TCS and all its partners with the goIT and I Innovate and STEM programs that they are doing. We need more business to come on board and make sure that we get the skill at the end of the day that business requires to make these economies grow, and also to ensure that the girl child has got the support and has got really the platforms to ensure that we develop and get that 50% that Karen is talking about. So everybody who is interested, we can reach out to learn more about this on the global.goit@tcs.com. Again, global.goit@tcs.com. And let's have a conversation around this. Let's bring out ideas. Let's help government and business to come together and have this and make this work. Thank you so much again to our panelists. Thank you so much for our viewers around the world. Thank you so much for our organizers. This was an exceptional conversation, much needed right now in the different situations that our countries are going through. I hope that we join again in January in Mexico. Let's continue with this. Let's build on this. And thank you so much. It was a pleasure being with you for this hour. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and bye, everybody.
Thanks a million.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Rochelle.
much. Bye.